There's a guy I used to know. Not a friend, more like someone I watched from a distance for years because I genuinely could not figure out how he operated. He was not the most talented person in the room. He was not the hardest worker. He was not particularly kind or generous with his time or his resources. In fact, people who didn't like him, and there were plenty, would have used the word selfish without thinking twice. And yet, this man accumulated. He accumulated money, opportunities, relationships, influence. Things just seemed to arrive for him, the kind of things most people spend their whole lives chasing. And meanwhile, I watched people around him, genuinely good people, people who gave everything, who put others first constantly, and those people were exhausted, broke, overlooked, waiting for something that never seemed to come. I watched that pattern for years before I stopped being confused by it and started being curious. Because confusion is where you stay when you're attached to how things should work. Curiosity is where you go when you're willing to see how they actually do. And the answer, when I finally found it, was so uncomfortable that I almost didn't want to say it out loud. I am the prize. The reality conforms to me. That's not arrogance. That's not narcissism. That's the operating system of every person who has ever built something real, attracted something real, or become something real. And if that statement made something in you flinch, I want you to stay with that flinch, because that flinch is the entire conversation we're about to have.
Let me tell you what nobody in the self-help space wants to say clearly. The universe does not have a moral compass. It does not reward suffering. It does not keep a ledger of sacrifices. It does not watch how hard you've been working and decide that this year is your year because you've paid enough dues. That model, the one most of us were raised on, the one built into every motivational poster and every well-meaning parent's advice, that model is not how reality operates at a neurological level. It is not how it operates at a psychological level. And if you've been playing by those rules and wondering why the results keep disappointing you, it's not because you haven't suffered enough. It's because suffering was never the currency. It was never the signal. You were sending the wrong transmission the whole time, and the universe, with perfect mechanical accuracy, was receiving exactly what you were sending. Here is what reality actually responds to: not effort, not goodness, not sacrifice, certainty, the absolute, unshakable, baseline-level certainty about who you are in the order of things. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because the people who have that certainty really have it, not as an affirmation they repeat in the mirror, but as something that lives in the body, in the posture, in the way they walk into a room. Those people are often not the most virtuous people you know. They are often the most focused on themselves. And that correlation is not a coincidence. It is a direct consequence of how the subconscious mind builds and broadcasts identity.
In 1994, Roy Baumeister published work on self-esteem that cracked open something most psychologists had been assuming without testing. The assumption was that high self-esteem was the result of success, that you did well, things went right, and you felt good about yourself. What Baumeister pulled apart was the direction of that causality, because the data kept suggesting that self-perception preceded outcomes, not the other way around. Your internal model of your own value was predicting behavior and attracting circumstances before the circumstances had a chance to happen. This wasn't mysticism. It was statistical pattern recognition in human behavior. The people who consistently placed themselves at the center of their own story were the ones whose story kept expanding. The people who placed themselves at the margins, helpful, available, accommodating, were the ones whose story stayed small. And here's what I mean by placing yourself at the center. I don't mean thinking you're better than everyone else. I don't mean stepping on people or treating the world like it owes you something because of your birthright. That's not what I'm talking about, and I want to make that distinction precisely because confusing those two things is exactly what keeps people stuck. What I mean is something much quieter and much more powerful than arrogance. I mean having a baseline orientation toward yourself that says, I come first in my own life. My needs are real. My direction matters. My energy is not infinitely available to everyone who asks. My time has weight, and I do not apologize for any of that. That's the thing. That's the posture, and it changes everything downstream, not because of some cosmic reward system, but because of how the nervous system broadcasts that certainty to every person, situation, and opportunity it encounters. Let me tell you about something that happened in neuroscience in the early 2000s that I think about constantly. A team studying mirror neuron activity. Those are the neurons responsible for how we read and respond to other people's internal states, found something that should have been a bigger headline than it was. They found that the emotional and physiological state of an individual is readable by others at a precognitive level. Before the thinking mind processes someone's tone, their word choice, their facial expression, before any of that reaches conscious interpretation, the nervous system of the person they're interacting with has already registered a felt sense of that person's internal landscape, who they believe themselves to be, whether they believe they are worth taking seriously, whether they are operating from scarcity or abundance, whether they expect to be chosen or expect to be overlooked. That data is transmitted and received before a single word is spoken. And that means that the way reality responds to you, the deals that close and the deals that don't, the opportunities that come and the ones that pass, all of that is downstream of something that happens in silence before you open your mouth. It's downstream of what your nervous system is saying about you when it enters a room.
This is why the sacrifice doesn't work the way you think it does. When you constantly put yourself last, when you override your needs to serve others, when you make yourself available at the cost of your own stability, when you shrink so that other people can feel comfortable, you are not transmitting virtue. You are not transmitting love. You're transmitting a belief. And the belief is this: I am the least important person in my own story. And every system you encounter, social systems, economic systems, romantic systems, reads that transmission and responds accordingly. Not cruelly, mechanically, with the same neutrality that gravity responds to mass. You taught the world what you were worth by the way you treated yourself, and the world took notes. I want to sit with that for a second because I know it lands hard. I've talked to people who've been giving everything for years, genuinely caring people, people whose capacity for generosity I admire deeply. And when I explain this to them, there's a moment where the face changes, where something shifts between hurt and recognition, because part of them already knew. Part of them had felt for a long time that the generosity wasn't being met with the response they expected, that the more they gave, the less they seemed to receive. And the conclusion most people jump to is that the world is ungrateful, or that the right people haven't seen their value yet, or that they just need to give a little more before things turn around. But that's not the problem. The problem is the program running underneath the behavior. The behavior of giving is not the issue. The belief that you must give constantly in order to justify your existence, that's the program. That's what's broadcasting. And until that program changes, the pattern holds.
Now, I need to introduce a term, and I want you to actually absorb this because it's the pivot point of everything. I call it the sovereign autoconception. Not a high opinion of yourself, not confidence in the performance sense where you walk in prepared and smile at the right moments. Something more fundamental than that. The sovereign autoconception is the bedrock belief that you are, not will be, not should be, not deserve to be, you are the protagonist of your own reality. Not because you're special in some extraordinary sense, but because no one else can be the protagonist of your life. The seat is either occupied or it isn't. And if you've been leaving that seat empty, or worse, inviting other people to fill it, then reality has no choice but to organize around someone else's center of gravity. And you feel that. You feel it as that background sense that your life is happening to you instead of from you, that you're reactive, that you're waiting, that the good stuff always seems to be happening slightly elsewhere.
Let me tell you about a study that confirms something I've seen anecdotally for years. In 2010, a team at the Kellogg School of Management, led by Adam Galinsky, ran a series of experiments on social power and the perception of competence. What they found was that individuals who oriented their behavior around their own goals and priorities, rather than constantly adjusting to accommodate the expectations and needs of others, were not only rated as more competent and influential by people who interacted with them, they also performed better on objective cognitive tasks. The self-focus wasn't just a social advantage, it was a neurological one. When you're not spending your cognitive and emotional resources managing everyone else's experience of you, those resources are available for the actual work, and the actual work goes better, and the results compound, and the identity reinforces. That's the loop the self-focused person is running. That's why it looks like magic from the outside. It's not magic, it's resource allocation at the level of the nervous system.
Here's where I need to separate two things that most people collapse into one. There's a version of self-focus that is actually fear. It's the kind of arrogance that has to announce itself, the person who needs you to know how important they are, the person who deflects criticism because criticism is a threat to a fragile construction, the person who tears others down because their identity requires a hierarchy and they need to be at the top. That version, the loud, defensive, aggressive version, is not sovereignty. It is insecurity wearing a costume. And the giveaway is that it requires constant maintenance. It requires an audience. It requires external validation to keep the structure standing. That person is still in the same trap as the self-sacrificer. They are both defining their worth in relation to others, one by giving too much, one by taking too much. Both of them are looking outward to establish something that can only be established inward. Pure sovereignty looks completely different. It's quiet. It doesn't need to compete because it's not in a competition. It doesn't need to announce itself because it's not trying to convince anyone of anything. It walks into a room and the room adjusts, not because it demanded that adjustment, but because the certainty it radiates is so total that the social environment simply reorganizes around it, the way water reorganizes around a stone. That's the thing you've been reading about in history books your whole life without recognizing it for what it is. Every person who changed the trajectory of their world, not the ones who performed greatness, but the ones who simply were it, had this quality, an unbroken relationship with their own authority, a self that did not need permission to exist at full volume.
So how do you build that? How do you go from the pattern you've been running, the one that has you shrinking, accommodating, apologizing for your needs, putting yourself last in line for your own life, how do you go from that to this? I'm going to tell you what actually works, not what sounds good in a podcast, because there's a lot of advice floating around about self-worth, and most of it operates at the level of thought, positive affirmations, journaling about your strengths, reframing negative beliefs, and all of that has its place, but none of it touches the actual location of the problem. The actual location of the problem is somatic. It's in the body. It's in the nervous system's default orientation towards self. Here is where the neuroscience of self-concept becomes practical. The work of Antonio Damasio, particularly in Descartes' error, established something that changed how I think about personal transformation completely. Damasio demonstrated that the self, what we experience as the continuous, coherent sense of who we are, is fundamentally a body-based construction, built from somatic markers, from the body's history of how it has oriented and positioned itself in the world. Which means you cannot think your way into a new self-concept, you have to embody your way into it. The body has to learn the new truth the way it learned the old one, through repetition, through sensation, through a new orientation that gets practiced until it becomes the default. So here's the practice. And I want you to take this seriously, because it sounds simple, and that simplicity is the thing that makes people dismiss it before they try it. Every day, before any other interaction, before you check your phone or answer someone else's first question or start performing for the world, you spend time in what I call the first position. The first position is the felt sense in the body of being the most important thing in your own reality. Not in a grandiose way, in a settled way, like gravity. You sit or you stand, and you locate in the body the quality of someone who does not wait for permission, someone who does not need the room's approval to know their own value, someone who has already decided. And you stay there. You let the nervous system practice that frequency the way a musician practices a chord progression, not thinking about it, feeling it, letting it settle into the tissue. And then you start making decisions from that place. Small ones at first. You say no to something you would have said yes to out of guilt. You choose the option that serves you when both options are available. You let someone else's discomfort with your boundary be their discomfort without taking it on as your responsibility to fix. You eat when you're hungry instead of waiting to make sure everyone else has been served. I know how small that sounds. I know you're looking for something more dramatic, but the dramatic transformation is made of these small recalibrations. Each one is a message to the nervous system. And the nervous system is listening. It is updating its model of who you are with every piece of evidence you give it. Feed it evidence of someone who occupies their own life fully, and it will start broadcasting that signal. And the world, with perfect mechanical accuracy, will start responding to the signal it's receiving.
There's another dimension of this that I want to touch before I close, because leaving it out would be dishonest. The world will push back. When you start doing this, holding your space, honoring your needs, operating from your own center, there will be people who don't like it, who experience your new orientation as a withdrawal of something they depended on, and they will communicate that displeasure in every way available to them. And the test, the real test, is whether you interpret that pushback as evidence that you got it wrong or as evidence that you got it right. Because the pushback is the pattern defending itself. The pattern that kept you small was also serving other people's patterns. When you stop participating in it, they feel it. That's not a sign to stop. That's a sign that the change is real. The people worth keeping in your life will adjust, not immediately, not without friction, but they will, because healthy people can respect a center of gravity. What they cannot do is maintain a deep connection with someone who doesn't have one, because you cannot be truly known by someone if you are never fully yourself. The sacrifice pattern, the self-erasure pattern, it doesn't create intimacy. It creates a version of you that other people depend on but cannot truly see. And somewhere under all the giving, under all the accommodation, there's a real person with real preferences and real needs who has been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. Not by the world, by you. You have to do it first. That's the sequence. You acknowledge yourself first. You treat yourself as the primary subject of your own life first, and then, not as a reward, not as a transaction, but as a consequence as inevitable as physics, the world starts treating you that way too. The arrogant person and the self-sacrificing person are running the same fear. One is compensating upward, one is compensating downward. Both are outsourcing their self-definition to other people's reactions. What I'm pointing at is a third option that most people don't even know exists because they've never seen it modeled clearly. A way of being in which you are simply, permanently, quietly certain of your own value. Not defensive of it, not performing it, just settled in it, the way you're settled in the fact of your own name. You don't announce it, you don't prove it, it just is.
And from that place, every action you take carries a different quality. Every conversation you have carries a different weight. Every opportunity that enters your field is evaluated through the lens of someone who knows what they're worth. And that lens is extraordinarily selective, because when you know your value, you stop accepting what you don't want in exchange for avoiding conflict. You stop performing gratitude for things that don't serve you. You stop making yourself small to make the room feel comfortable. And the room reorganizes. The room makes space for you. That's not a metaphor. That is the measurable, observable, neurologically explainable consequence of operating from sovereign self-concept.
There was a moment in my own life where I made a decision I can only describe as a shift in allegiance. I stopped being loyal to the version of me that other people had gotten used to, and I started being loyal to the version of me that I actually recognized when I was alone and honest with myself. That decision cost me something. Some relationships didn't survive the new orientation. Some expectations I had been unconsciously feeding went unfed, and that created friction. But what came in after that friction cleared, in terms of self-respect, in terms of the quality of people and opportunities and moments, was so disproportionately better that I wonder sometimes what I was protecting before, what I thought I was preserving by staying small. Because the answer, when you look at it clearly, is nothing. You were protecting a familiar discomfort over an unfamiliar freedom. That's what most people are doing. And the only way out is to choose the freedom with the understanding that the discomfort of the transition is finite and the freedom on the other side is not.
Here is what I want to leave you with. Not a summary, not a checklist, something more like a seed. The subconscious mind does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you demonstrate you believe. And the clearest demonstration of belief is how you treat yourself when no one is watching, when there is no audience and no performance and no one to impress. In those moments, in the decisions you make about your own time, your own energy, your own priorities, in those quiet, private choices, you are programming the deepest layer of your operating system. You are teaching your nervous system what you are worth, and your nervous system is teaching the world. So the question is not, what do you want to attract? The question is, who do you become when there's nothing to prove and no one to convince? Because that person, the one who shows up in the silence, that's the one who changes everything. Become them first. Not later, not after you've achieved the things that will make you feel worthy. Now. Walk through today as that person. Let that person decide what to say yes to and what to walk away from. Let that person set the terms. Let that person hold the center. And watch what the world does next. It will surprise you with how quickly it adjusts when you finally stop adjusting for it.